Like Jesus Zoomcast. I'm Karen Conley, and I'm honored to be here as a part of Lead Like Jesus with a second part to our Zoomcast with our guest, Peter Demis. Peter, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much. Again, I like being here. Thank you.
Well, if our audience did not get a chance to join us for the first part of this, I really encourage you go back and either listen to it or watch it. Peter is a man who has had incredible success. He's president and CEO of Demis Brands, has been in the restaurant industry, is a lawyer, is top 20 leaders under 40. Am I remembering that correctly? I think
Yes.
you had multiple accolades as I was reading your bio. I was like, where do I even start with Peter? But as someone who is living out his faith in the business world, that is unfortunately not as common in our culture as it has been in the past. And what was so refreshing about our part one was just really hearing your authentic journey. It's not always glamorous, and there's conflict and strife, and yet to see God's faithfulness and to see how he has blessed you was a great encouragement to us. And so as we kind of move into this part two, I really wanted to maybe pick your brain and have you share some of your wisdom with our audience. You now are walking this thing out in your business, and all of the troubles of the world have not disappeared because you have put God first in your life. And
Harder, actually.
Yes, I think that's true. Help our audience and in a way to say, okay, so many times we hear, let's just turn it all over to the Lord or leave it at his feet. But maybe you could walk us through, what does that really look like, to take it out of Christianese or out of the, really religious language that we use. I think your personality is perfect to help us know what does that look like?
So Christian speak irritates me. I'll just be honest. And there's a practicalness behind it that we miss out. And I think part of the reason why it irritates me is I came to faith late in life, and but I was around people who were Christians. I would hear them, give that speak. You just turn it over. You turn it over, and it's like, you know what? If I were to turn this pen over to you, that's simple. I can physically touch the pen. I can hand it to somebody who I physically can see and touch. Mm-hmm. But to turn your cares and concerns, to turn a business over, like, how do you do that to Jesus? He's living, he's right here, but how do you do that? And so there was the practical aspect of it that was troubling to me, because again, I can say the words all day long, but doesn't mean that it's true. I can say that I look like Brad Pitt. It doesn't make it true, So I have to. So there was that part of it. So when I said, look, we got to turn everything over to Jesus from the business side of it, I was like, okay, so what exactly does that entail? Mm-hmm. And so you have to look at, what does Jesus actually ask us to do? Mm-hmm. And he asked us to preach the gospel, make disciples. Mm-hmm. You can't get clearer than that. I wash pots and pans for a living. I'm just, so I need simple stuff. And so I thought, okay, how simple can we, can this be? We could preach the gospel and make disciples. And so then it's the matter of, okay, so how do we do that? We can't preach the gospel to believers because they already know the gospel. With believers, you try to make disciples for them. You may get an opportunity to share the gospel with people who may not have ever had an opportunity to. And so we can do that not only through the way that we conduct business, but also in the way that we just tell them. We ask them and we talk to them, we pray over them. All of our evaluations, when we evaluate every employee at least once a month, and or we try to. I can't say we're 100% at that, but at the bottom of every evaluation is questions. How they rate us as well. And one of the questions is there anything that we could be praying for you, or notify our chaplain for you? And what's incredible is those that don't believe in God don't mind asking for prayers to God on their behalf. So we, and so we recognize that even though they may leave us, our job is not to make converts. Our job is to preach the gospel. And somebody else may be able to take that and go with it. So from that, that's our purpose, and that's how we're able to turn that over in that regard, is just do what he asks us to do.
Well, and I love how simple you just made it. And sometimes we get all worked up and think it's so complicated and it's impossible. And in this culture, how can you do that? And I love the simplicity. And I think, the way that you flesh that out, okay, if they don't know, they need to hear. And if they do know, then I'm responsible to help grow them and disciple them. And that really, to me, is such a simple, doable way to repeat regardless of your industry. And so I appreciate you sharing that. How do you've mentioned a little bit in our last podcast that your wife runs the social media and is involved and has to kind of be the front lines. How do you handle any backlash, or have you had any backlash
Yes.
with yourself being as visible a Christian leader as you have become?
So the first amount of backlash was really interesting. Obviously, it came from the employees at first, and that was more ridicule. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you have to realize that ridicule is not a 21st century attack upon Christians. It's in Acts, they even talk about the fact that their plan was to ridicule them, to lose credibility. So it's not like this is something that's new, that Christians never experienced before. But ultimately, what that boils down to is a fear. We're afraid of being made fun of.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do or what I do and what I encourage in my book is I say, write out what you're afraid of. I'm afraid I'll be made fun of and I'll lose my friends. Then change that I'm afraid of and scratch that out and write above it, I don't trust God to take care of this situation and my friendship. And then say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is incredible how that because every time you're afraid of anything, you're already telling God you don't trust him. So you might as well verbalize it so that you can move past it and go forward. What's incredible to me is I used to speak to business groups about customer service or about the restaurant industry, never got afraid. I speak to groups all the time about fear. And all of a sudden, like, I'll get gripped with it. I was all of a sudden, like, I'm all of a sudden afraid to speak out about fear and whatever. So there's that. It's like the spirit of fear that they reference in Timothy is saying, no, I don't want you to to have people do that. And what I do when that happens is I just sit there and say, Lord, I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a peace that comes over on that. So that's part of it. But then it moved to the customer side. Customers or family, you can't fire people because you're a Christian. You can't do this because you're a Christian. You can't, all the stuff that I'm allowed to do and not do. And that became an opportunity to share the gospel. And then, yeah, the backlash comes in all different ways. And when your attitude starts to change toward God, it starts changing your whole perspective and starts helping you get through those moments of crisis. And then he can start moving in your life. The problem with the Hebrews when they were going through those problems is they complained nonstop. And you got to think about it. Thanksgiving, if we're praying up for Thanksgiving, who are we talking to when we complain? It's just something really simple that we have to kind of understand and grasp, and we have to change who we are first before we can ask God to move in our lives.
That's so great. I want to ask you a little bit more about your business, but you referred to your children, and I just wanted to ask, I don't know their ages when this transition and transformation was really happening in your life. But as a father, looking back, how do you see God's activity in you influencing them?
So yeah, they were 11 and 9, give or take a year or so, or they were right about to turn 11 and 9 is what it was. So, and we talk about Peter BC, Peter before Christ, and so we talk with them about it, and I listen to them, and they remember the anger that I had. They remember me yelling a lot. We had one person one time sneak to our home and we yelled at them to get out of our house, and the kids took off running away. And when I went to them later and I said, hey, did that lady scare you? And they said, no, Dad, you did. And so I've asked them, I said, what? And they're like, well, you still get mad at us. You'll still yell at us. They said, but you will always come back now and explain it when you do. And and they, when you give advice, you'll talk about it from a Christian perspective now. And so they're understanding it. My son has, from even a little boy, had so much faith and everything. So for so many years, I was jealous of his faith because I wasn't a believer, but I recognized the faith that he had. And and so to see that, I've become tremendously closer to my children. And I had to go through the middle school years as a Christian. So to not lose Jesus during that time, that's a miracle in and of itself. So, uh, but they, but to help guide them and coach them along those ways through this world that we're living in, is been absolutely wonderful. And then at one point in time, we were actually making our children an idol in a way, and we had people correct us and say, you need to turn them over to God. And Kristen and I had to go out and we sat down on a curb outside of a shopping center, and we bawling, crying, saying, Lord, these are your children. We thank you for allowing us this opportunity. If you want to take them now, you can. We want we want to keep them around as long as possible, but if you want to take them, you can, because they're yours. And we just thank you for it, but they're your children. It was one of the hardest things we ever had to do. But the Bible tells us that our children are his inheritance to us. So as a result, they're his. And so to look at it from that side and realize that it's my job to raise them in that sense. Now they're both dating, and we know the people they're dating, and that's absolutely wonderful. So many parents, especially of daughters, fathers of daughters, are like, oh, that's just. I'm like, no, this is absolutely incredible, because I get to share into somebody else's life. And if I could trust God with my life and my salvation, isn't it a little hypocritical of me to not trust him with my children's lives and salvation? So I have to turn that over to them as well. It's not easy. It's really not easy, but I have to remind myself a lot. But the reality is that's the truth of it.
Well, that's a good word, whether your children are younger and at home, or even with adult children. As you said, that if we can trust the Lord with our own salvation, we can trust him with theirs. So that's a great word. Well, as we come to the end of our time together, maybe just one last question for you. Here you are, and you now have a window of time you can look back and reflect on what God has done so far in your life. How do you define success now? You talked about billable hours and wins when you were in the law field. What does success look like for you now?
So when you look at what success is, and again, I talk about this in my book as well, in the last chapter of my book. When you actually look at what success is defined by the rules. Right. I mean, so if I'm a successful golf player, it means I scored low. If I'm a successful football player, I scored high. So success changes based off of the rules that are there. So what are the rules that Jesus sets forth for us? To preach the gospel, make disciples. So every time I preach the gospel, whether or not they make fun of me, whether or not they get saved, from one extreme to the next, that's success. So sharing the gospel is the biggest level of success that you have. It really is. And then the ways on who to share the gospel to and what to do, you only know by spending time with him and in his word. I've had people ask me before, how do how do you know God's talking to you? And I'm like, well, first of all, because he's already telling you stuff every day when you're reading in the word. That's how he communicates to you, by systematic reading of it. And then the closer you get, the more in tune you are to his voice. And the first time you dated your husband or your wife, you probably didn't know their voice when they called you on the phone. And then after a while, it was like, it wasn't like hey, this is Peter. It's, hey, this is me. And then it just moves to, hey, so and it slowly moves from there. But it starts with the word that he's already given you. It's amazing. The Bible is the only book where the author comes along and explains it to himself. So it's spending time with that every morning so that from there how to be successful, how to be able to handle it. Success can mean, again, just sharing that gospel. Success can mean, going and forgiving somebody, forgiving that relative of yours or that ex-business partner. And there are a lot of people who are in business that just hate their old business partners, and going and forgiving them, for and just for what they did or for what you did. Just asking for that forgiveness. It doesn't matter what their response is. We succeed when we become obedient.
Yeah. That's so true. That is so true. Well, Peter, it has been an absolute delight to get to know you. Thank you for the privilege of being able to interview you and for sharing with the Lead Like Jesus family some of your lessons that God has taught you. And I just cannot thank you enough for the time that you've had. We have mentioned a couple of times that you have a book called Afraid to Trust. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
I would love for our audience to be able to have a way to get that book. I know it's available on Amazon and all Barnes & Noble and all the traditional places, but also give them your website in case they would like to have contact with you directly or have you come speak to their business or church.
Yeah, so it's afraidtotrust.com. It's all one word, and it's just basically the title of the book. And so you can go there, you can fill out a contact us form, you can link to any of the restaurant pages. It's kind of just a good landing page for you to do whatever. Again, if you want me to speak to a church or to a group conference, then I do that all over the nation as well. So anytime but even if something as simple as you just need prayers, contact me if you're worried about something, because again, that fear that gets hold of us is the biggest distractor that we had in becoming closer to God. And so if there's just something that you're afraid of, then contact us there, and we can lead you through the process that we counsel many of our employees on.
Well, as our parting word, you made the example of make that list of the things that you're afraid of. And then instead of saying that I'm afraid, to say I don't trust God too, and to make yourself verbalize that. I think in terms of a really practical tool, that is a great exercise to really help us put our perspective back where our eyes are on the Lord, and to know, no, I do trust him and I can give this over to him. So Peter, thank you so much for your time. To our Lead Like Jesus family, thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been a huge encouragement and gift to you. If you want to get your hands on any of the Lead Like Jesus resources, go to leadlikejesus.com, and we'll see you next time.